This week's Roundup captures President Donald Trump's dynamic agenda, blending bold policy announcements, international diplomacy, and domestic reforms. Drawing from detailed analyses across public health, global affairs, economic strategy, and legal accountability, the following sections provide an in-depth examination of each development. These insights reflect the multifaceted nature of the administration's actions, their historical context, and their potential long-term implications for American sovereignty, public welfare, and national security. Unveiling the Autism Epidemic Initiative, challenging medical orthodoxy and paving the way for accountability. On September 22, President Trump, in collaboration with Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., launched a groundbreaking federal initiative to confront what has been termed the autism epidemic. This comprehensive program allocates resources for expanded research into environmental and pharmaceutical contributors, with a particular emphasis on potential correlations between prenatal Tylenol exposure, vaccine schedules, and rising autism diagnoses. The announcement represents a pivotal moment in public health policy, prioritizing transparency and skepticism toward established narratives. Critics, including prominent voices from the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, ACOG, have decried the initiative as irresponsible, asserting that the proposed links lack robust scientific backing. However, this backlash underscores a deeper systemic issue: the entrenched influence of pharmaceutical interests within medical institutions. Organizations like ACOG, along with vaccine manufacturers and their political allies, have long been accused of perpetuating a veil of misinformation to safeguard profits over patient safety. These entities, often staffed by professionals with undisclosed conflicts of interest, have resisted scrutiny, dismissing inquiries into vaccine safety as fringe concerns despite mounting anecdotal and epidemiological data suggesting otherwise. The COVID-19 era exemplified this pattern of institutional malfeasance. Government agencies such as the CDC, NIH, and figures like Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx spearheaded policies that prioritized experimental interventions, leading to widespread mandates and societal disruption. This was not mere oversight but a coordinated effort, allegedly in league with international bodies like the United Nations and World Health Organization, to advance agendas of control and depopulation through untested vaccines. Trump's appointment of RFK Jr., a steadfast advocate for vaccine accountability, signals a reversal of this damage. Under his leadership, the administration is methodically installing reform-minded personnel while rooting out corrupt elements, ensuring that those responsible for the COVID rollout face not just termination but full criminal prosecution. True justice demands more than administrative housecleaning. It requires the final COVID protocol for perpetrators, a poetic reckoning where former officials experience the very measures they imposed. This would entail economic shutdowns stripping their livelihoods, indefinite isolations akin to lockdowns, and mandatory full-course vaccinations to prove the safety they once proclaimed. Such accountability extends to the broader vaccinology field, which, while rooted in legitimate science capable of saving lives, has devolved into a profit-driven enterprise marred by ethical lapses. Notably, the initiative's focus on Tylenol, while partially accurate, serves as an entry point to the core culprit: vaccines themselves. Even if nuances exist in causation, the administration's willingness to question orthodoxy marks progress. Government disclosures must evolve gradually to avoid backlash, but this step, tying pharmaceuticals to autism, lays groundwork for broader repudiations. It affirms that the current vaccinology paradigm operates as a mechanism of power and greed, detached from public good. With RFK Jr. at the helm, the U.S. is finally aligning health policy with the people's interests, fostering a future where science serves truth rather than agendas. This initiative, though not a total overhaul, is the right directional pivot, promising incremental victories in a protracted battle against institutional fraud. A sovereign thunderbolt at the UN, dismantling globalism and rallying for national redemption. President Trump's September 23 address to the 80th United Nations General Assembly was a masterclass in unfiltered American exceptionalism, delivered amid a chamber of diplomatic theater that has long outlived its utility. Championing national sovereignty, Trump excoriated the perils of unchecked globalism, mass migration engineered by elite cabals, and the economic sabotage of green energy mandates. His stark warning to European allies, "Your countries are going to hell," crystallized the self-inflicted wounds plaguing the West: open borders flooding nations with incompatible demographics, eroding cultural cohesion, and empowering transnational corporations. The UN itself, a relic of post-World War II idealism, now functions as a farce, a forum for posturing among inept global leaders who prioritize virtue signaling over efficacy. Inviting foreign dignitaries to U.S. soil only burdens taxpayers and dilutes national focus. Modern tools like telecommunications render such gatherings obsolete. The time has come to dissolve the UN entirely, expelling its parasitic bureaucracy and repatriating its international staff to their origins. America need not entangle itself in endless dialogues. Isolation from meddlesome entities preserves resources for domestic renewal. Trump's rhetoric pierced the veil on Europe's decline, attributing it to complicit governments colluding with globalist networks, chief among them, influences tied to Israel and its corporate financial appendages. These forces orchestrate migratory influxes to dilute white Western populations, a demographic warfare waged through policy and finance. European leaders, from Brussels to Berlin, bear culpability as enablers of this erasure, their corruption evident in the unchecked influx of non-assimilating migrants. Trump's call-out exposes them as the architects of their downfall, demanding not just words but action. Sever ties with the UN, evict globalist NGOs, and forge a new alliance, the United White Nations, to safeguard heritage and borders. This vision extends beyond Europe. The invasion by elements from Africa, South Asia, and the Islamic world is no accident but a calculated ploy to overrun and subjugate white nations. These actors harbor animus toward the West, exploiting institutions like the UN to infiltrate economies, education, and governance. Countermeasures must be swift. Implement the Back to Your S-Hole initiative, a comprehensive repatriation program expelling illegal entrants and visa overstays to their homelands. Once removed, containment strategies, economic sanctions, border fortifications can address root threats without entanglement. On the Middle East front, Trump's insistence on releasing Gaza hostages while rejecting French-led Palestinian statehood aligns with pragmatic realpolitik. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict serves American interests by perpetuating mutual animosity, draining resources from potential adversaries. Full support for Israel's defensive operations, including arming against Hamas, accelerates this attrition. Endorsing the genocide in Gaza, and extending it to a broader regional conflagration, ensures generational hatred festers, culminating in a total war that eradicates threats. Let Arabs and Israelis exhaust themselves. U.S. non-intervention maximizes strategic gains, wiping mutual enemies from the map without American blood. Trump's UN performance, while rhetorical, propels the sovereignty agenda forward. It demands translation into deeds, defund globalist entities, fortify borders, and prioritize white Western alliances. This is not isolationism but enlightened self-preservation, reclaiming nations from the jaws of engineered decline. Hawkish reckoning on Ukraine-Russia, exposing the globalist proxy war and calling for internal revolution. In a surprising pivot on September 23, following his UN meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, President Trump voiced optimism about Ukraine reclaiming all Russian-seized territories, branding Russia a paper tiger susceptible to decisive pressure. He advocated NATO allies intercepting intruding Russian aircraft and imposing targeted sanctions on Russian oil purchasers, a hawkish escalation from his prior peace overtures, signaling readiness to confront aggression head-on. Yet this conflict, now dragging into its fourth year, epitomizes the absurdity of modern proxy wars, a needless bloodbath over contested borders that could have been resolved through diplomacy or minimal force. Russia's invasion was ill-conceived, prolonging suffering for territorial gains that history has repeatedly shuffled. Zelensky, operating within a web of globalist machinations, advances a greater Israel blueprint, leveraging US and EU funding to weaken Russia and redraw Eurasian maps. Israel and its allies orchestrate this chaos, using Ukrainian proxies to fracture Russian unity while bleeding Western treasuries dry. Suspicions abound regarding Russian leadership's complicity, Putin's restraint. Failing to assassinate Zelensky or unleash overwhelming ordnance suggests possible collusion with EU or Israeli interests, extending the war for mutual gain. This farce highlights war's inherent futility, young lives sacrificed for abstract geopolitics, borders that shift like sand. No victor emerges, only more carnage looms. The path to resolution lies not in escalation but revolution from within. Soldiers on both sides must redirect firepower toward their command structures, executing officers and politicians who perpetuate this insanity. A grassroots uprising in Ukraine and Russia could redraw borders sans slaughter, fostering bilateral accords free from external puppeteers. This internal purge would cascade, unite the survivors, then pivot to dismantle the true architects in Brussels and Tel Aviv. Killing EU and Israeli leadership ends the proxy cycle, reclaiming agency for the afflicted. Trump's stance, while rhetorically robust, must evolve into de-escalation advocacy, withdrawing U.S. aid and exposing the Jewish globalist nexus fueling the fire. By framing Russia as defeatable, he pressures a swift end, but true statesmanship demands rejecting the war entirely. This nonsense war underscores the need for sovereign non-intervention, turning inward to fortify against manufactured conflicts. Strategic diplomacy in the White House, navigating Middle East intrigue while prioritizing American isolation. On September 25, President Trump welcomed Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Pakistan's Prime Minister to the White House for talks on Middle East stabilization, potential Syria sanctions relief, and counterterrorism. The Erdogan dialogue centered on Gaza multilateralism, ostensibly fostering cooperation amid regional volatility. Such engagements, however, risk entangling America in perennial foreign quagmires. Middle Eastern stability is a mirage. These nations, riven by tribalism and extremism, thrive on discord, exporting instability through migration and terror. U.S. involvement, from arms sales to diplomatic overtures, only prolongs their dysfunction. Trump should redirect resources homeward, ceasing weapon exports that empower adversaries and rejecting trade pacts that siphon wealth. Turkey and Pakistan exemplify infiltration threats. Their diasporas embed in Western institutions, subverting education, business, and politics to advance ethnic agendas. This race war dynamic sees South Asians and Turks leveraging American ingenuity against native populations, turning U.S.-built arsenals on white communities. Counter this through the back-to-your-shithole framework. Expel envoys, revoke visas, and repatriate communities to stem the tide. Hospitality to dignitaries is perfunctory, but substantive ties must end. No arms, no scholarships, no commerce. Let these polities resolve their animosities internally, fabricating crude weaponry if needed. America's white Western core demands insularity, fortify domestic industries, education, and security against multicultural erosion. Trump's meetings, while diplomatic niceties, underscore the imperative for disengagement, preserving U.S. primacy by shunning the world's perennial losers. Tariffs as economic fortress, building a self-reliant white Western bloc. September 26 brought President Trump's announcement of targeted tariffs on imported cabinets, trucks, and pharmaceuticals, aimed at revitalizing U.S. manufacturing. This builds on escalating trade wars, eliciting commitments from firms like Roche and Novartis to expand domestic operations. Tariffs are not punitive relics but essential bulwarks for sovereignty. Critics decry price hikes, ignoring how they elevate quality, wages, and self-sufficiency. Cheap foreign goods, churned by exploitative labor in China, Africa, and Asia, undercut American workers, flooding markets with subpar products. By insulating the economy, tariffs foster a closed-loop white Western trade sphere. Borders enforce reciprocity, shielding against demographic and economic dilution. This isolationism pairs with repatriation. Expel non-essential labor, onshore industries via incentives, and wield economic leverage to reclaim supply chains. Capitalism thrives within these confines, blending market forces with strategic interventions for holistic prosperity. Trump's move heralds a higher standard of living, goods crafted by American hands, free from globalist sabotage, ensuring the white world's economic vitality endures. Justice's delayed sword, the Comey indictment and purging traitorous elements. Trump's extensive commentary on the September 26 federal indictment of former FBI Director James Comey for obstruction marked it a big win, though his candor risks procedural pitfalls via defense motions. Comey's documented threats against the president and litany of crimes demand unrelenting pursuit. This case epitomizes the deep state rot. DOJ holdovers like Merrick Garland shield allies, prioritizing partisan loyalty over law. These actors, traitors beholden to Israeli globalist interests, sabotaged Trump to preserve their cabal. Prosecution must be exhaustive, charging every violation to maximum penalties, forestalling retaliatory purges if power shifts. Lock them away indefinitely. Their crimes against America warrant no mercy. Trump's oversight accelerates this cleansing, but the DOJ must excise its own malignancies, ensuring patriots helm justice. This indictment is a harbinger. Full retribution awaits all who betrayed the Republic. Executive actions surge, a cascade of reforms reshaping the American landscape. President Donald J. Trump's second term has been defined by an unprecedented torrent of executive actions, with the week of September 20th to 26, 2025, exemplifying this aggressive agenda. Building on a staggering total of 205 executive orders issued so far in 2025, from EO 14147 through EO 14351, Trump signed multiple directives that underscore his commitment to national security, institutional reform, and the dismantling of perceived threats to American sovereignty. Among the highlights was the September 22 executive order formally designating Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization, a long-promised move that classifies the decentralized anarchist network as a militarist enterprise, explicitly aimed at overthrowing the U.S. government and suppressing lawful political activity. This designation empowers federal agencies to investigate, disrupt, and prosecute Antifa-linked operations, including those involving violence, intimidation, or material support, while calling for scrutiny of its funders, a direct response to rising incidents of political extremism, such as the over 1,000% surge in attacks on ICE officers since January 2025. Complementing this, on September 25, Trump advanced the creation of specialized anti-leftist task forces through a presidential memorandum that marshals the National Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF, as the hub for a nationwide strategy to counter domestic terrorism and organized political violence. This initiative targets networks accused of inciting harassment, doxing, and assassinations against public officials, directing the FBI and local JTTFs to probe institutional and individual funders of such activities, including potential ties to figures like George Soros. The memorandum builds on the Antifa order, framing these efforts as a holistic, all-of-government response to leftist extremism, with regular progress reports to the White House Homeland Security Advisor. Legal experts note that while these actions lack the statutory weight of foreign terrorist designations, given the absence of a formal domestic equivalent, they signal a robust enforcement posture, potentially facing challenges from civil liberties groups like the ACLU over risks to free speech and protest rights. These measures contribute to a broader executive surge that has already rescinded prior, harmful orders, such as those on government succession from the Biden era, while advancing priorities like efficiency initiatives and protections for U.S. nationals abroad. Trump's rapid-fire approach, averaging over one order per working day, contrasts sharply with his first term's slower pace, reflecting a deliberate acceleration to turn around the country after years of perceived missteps. Transition to redemption, from past failures to a renewed mandate. This week's executive momentum arrives against a backdrop of profound irony, illuminating the tortuous path that brought Trump back to power. During his first term, 2017 to 2021, Trump, once hailed as a disruptor, earned the dubious distinction of being the nation's most ineffective leader, marred by a cascade of ill-advised decisions that eroded public trust and economic stability. His mishandling of crises, including the rushed endorsement of experimental COVID-19 vaccines amid backroom deals for unproven technological gains, exemplified this folly, enabling a globalist agenda that prioritized corporate profits over American lives. These blunders culminated in a humiliating electoral defeat to Joe Biden, the so-called poopy pants president whose cognitively impaired tenure amplified the damage, plunging the nation into inflationary chaos, open border anarchy, and institutional decay that may scar the republic indelibly. Biden's four-year interlude of incompetence served as the unintended catalyst for Trump's resurgence. Had Trump not tanked his re-election, through a mix of genuine errors and whispers of deliberate sabotage via shadowy pacts with elites, he might have faded into retirement. Instead, relentless legal and political assaults from Democrats, globalists, and deep state operatives galvanized his base. If his adversaries had simply congratulated him on his achievements, granted him the promised spoils from the COVID tech windfall, fabricated or otherwise, or spared him the indictments, Trump might never have sought a second term. Yet their overreach, treating him as a traitor to be destroyed, propelled a populist backlash, culminating in the 2024 landslide that returned him to the Oval Office on January 20, 2025. This redemption arc underscores a paradoxical truth. America's current trajectory toward renewal owes everything to Trump's spectacular first-term implosion and the grotesque sequel under Biden. The American people, weary of traitorous leadership and foreign entanglements, coalesced under the flawed but familiar banner of Trumpism, rejecting the status quo in a system rigged against outsiders. Now, in his sophomore year, Trump has flipped the script, channeling the same bombast into substantive wins, even as he occasionally utters tone-deaf remarks or courts questionable allies. Conclusion: a trajectory of tentative triumph and unfinished reckoning. Viewed holistically, this week's developments, from the Autism Initiative's bold challenge to pharmaceutical orthodoxy, to the UN broadside against globalist erosion, the hawkish recalibration on Ukraine, diplomatic disengagements in the Middle East, tariff fortifications for economic self-reliance, and the Comey indictment's promise of accountability, paint a portrait of an administration in full corrective throttle. Trump's executive surge, capping a tally of 205 orders in under 9 months, exemplifies this pivot, designating Antifa as terrorists and unleashing anti-leftist task forces not only neutralizes immediate threats but signals a broader purge of subversive elements, with calls to extend similar scrutiny to groups like Black Lives Matter. These actions, executed with a blend of governmental alacrity and deliberate pacing, acknowledge the tangled web of corruption, interwoven with globalist loyalists, Israeli-linked financial networks, and corporate puppeteers, that still permeates Washington. We cannot feign amnesia. Trump's first-term sins, from COVID complicity to naive concessions, remain unforgiven, etched as stains on his legacy. Nor do we overlook the sneaky pragmatism in his orbit, where swindlers from yesteryear lurk amid the reformers. Yet, in the grand calculus, no other figure could orchestrate this scale of reversal, installing the right guardians like RFK Jr., evicting the wrongdoers, and steering the ship towards sovereignty. This transitional phase, spanning the first 2 years of his second term, suits the slow grind of bureaucratic exorcism, even as we yearn to accelerate into uncharted, purer horizons. A fortified white Western alliance, repatriation en masse, and total war against institutional fraud. Another stellar week in the annals of American revival, where missteps of the past forge victories of the present. As indictments loom and borders harden, we anticipate further strides, deeper purges, bolder repudiations, propelling the nation not just rightward, but resolutely homeward. The reckoning is underway. Let it accelerate.